Welcome to South-South News. I'm Bill Miller. One of the main goals of South-South News is to focus attention on unique and innovative projects that are underway, especially with economically developing countries. Today we're going to talk about a wide range of issues that affect not only the economically developing countries, but also people all around the world, such as climate change and many others. My guest today is an expert in this particular area. His Excellency, Ambassador Gyan Acharya, is the permanent representative of Nepal to the United Nations in New York. Representative Acharya also served prior to this. He was in Switzerland and he represented Nepal at the United Nations World Trade Organization as well as with the Swiss government. He is chairing the group called the Least Developed Countries. Your Excellency, welcome to South-South News.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you being with me today. We're going to get into the least developed countries and climate change and many other issues in a moment. Let me ask you though, a lot of people I know have heard of Nepal, a lot of people have been to Nepal, but perhaps some people would like to go and haven't been there. Tell us a bit about Nepal. Where is it located? How large is it? What are some of your major industries?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for having me here. Nepal is a country in Asia. We are between the two big countries, India and China. Therefore, our population population is about 29 million, but because we are between the two giants, we look small as well. And we have about 150,000 square kilometer, and we have high mountains, we have valleys, and we have lowlands. But Nepal is also mostly known around the world for having the Mount Everest, which is the highest peak on the earth, but also maybe about 8 out of the 10 highest peaks around the world. And we have also, how do I say, the great cultural variety and ethnic variety in the country. We have lowlands, we have also the tropical areas. So you can see that from the 8,800 plus meters of Mount Everest, you can go almost down to the sea level within about 60 miles, which is a very short distance from the low point to the high point. So this is where we are. And we are also one of the countries which have remained independent throughout history, and we are trying our best to promote our economy. Our main economy is agriculture, but tourism is another very important industry in Nepal. We have a lot of tourists by our standard, of course. We get something like 700,000 to 800,000 tourists a year, and Nepal is also a place where Buddha was born. So this is very interesting that we have a religious diversity and the ethnic diversity. We have a few industries, basically the consumer products and others that we produce, an agricultural country, and we have a huge potential for hydropower. We have a country with great many rivers. The Himalaya is the source of water for many countries, not only for Nepal, but for many countries down the stream. So that's a little about Nepal.
Well, that's certainly a very interesting country, one that's very culturally rich, and as you mentioned, Buddha was born there, right. So you have a lot of firsts and a lot of superlatives with 8 of the 10 highest peaks in the world in Nepal. Let's talk a little bit about the least developed countries. What exactly the LDCs, what is this group? Where, not every member, but how many members roughly are in it, and what are some of your major issues?
Right. Well, I mean, if you look around the world, I think it was in the 70s that it was decided that you have to look around the world and then see where the countries stand. And they found that there are many countries, especially the countries which are struggling with their development efforts. And there are today about 48 countries which are what we consider least developed. It is the United Nations which has defined them as the least developed countries in terms of economic development and in terms of human development. So there are many challenges that they face, but it shows that they need international support. They need to make an effort for development by themselves, which is absolutely the first and foremost the responsibility of countries like ourselves. But more than that, because we all live in a very integrated and globalized world, it is a responsibility of the international community, and especially when we talk about global peace, global stability, and global security, the interest of everyone must be promoted. The equality and equity must be promoted around the world. That is the firm basis of the promotion of the ideals of the United Nations. So we have many countries from Africa, about 33 countries in Africa, which are members of this LDC group. There are about 14 countries in Asia, and there is one country in Western Hemisphere, that is Haiti, which also belongs to this category of the countries. And the basis for defining this category is there are mainly three bases. One is the level of human development, which is very much not advanced. The second is the income level, which is around less than $1,000 per capita income, and third is their vulnerability to international shocks or the disasters and other things. So we have a great variety of the countries which belong to that. Some are landlocked, some are what they call sea-locked, and some are small island states, some others are big states, but they're still grappling with the development challenges for various reasons, for the natural regions, for the historical regions, but again for various reasons. But again, willing to move forward, willing to work hard, but also looking forward to very strong international support for their efforts.
Mm-hmm. Now, these 48 countries, I think you mentioned, they had a conference not long, May 9th through the 12th, 2011 in Istanbul, Turkey. It was a major conference that brought probably the majority of the nations of the world together in the UN machinery. What were some of the issues that were discussed, and what were some of the recommendations that came out of the conference to focus attention on how to best help these 48 countries to raise themselves, to improve the quality of life and the standard of living?
You know that this is a very important UN conference, not only for the LDCs, because it takes place every 10 years. And it tries to deal with the development challenges of these countries in a comprehensive manner. That's why this is a very important conference. And we had the representation from all the countries around the world. There were heads of state and government from the LDC countries, but also heads of state and government and ministers and senior people from many developed countries. We had the president of the European Commission himself, president of Finland, prime minister of Belgium. So there were many ministers and the prime ministers and others who were present, and besides, of course, the LDC countries themselves who were represented at the highest level. It dealt basically with three things. Because it takes place every 10 years, we always try to look at the development challenges of all our countries. As I said it in the beginning, because the interest of the global, the global community now is so much integrated with each other in a globalized world of today. Anything that happens in one part of the world affects all the countries around the world because of the communication, because of the transportation, because of technology, and because of the exchange of our, the people, the commodities, the trade, everything. So our hope and our focus was on how, in an integrated and globalized world, we try and we work together for the promotion of the well-being of all the countries around the world. So naturally, the most vulnerable group around these countries, around the world, are the countries which are called least developed countries. So there were three areas in which basically we tried to focus our attention on. The first was naturally the Millennium Development Goal related challenges, which is human development, whether it is education, whether it is health or sanitation, or the women's empowerment, equality, all these issues. We had the conference of the MDG, midterm review just last year. We tried to show during this conference of the LDCs that this is where we have the biggest challenge in terms of the MDG. So we have to accelerate the efforts, and we have to look even beyond 2015, how we can even try to work towards the attainment of the MDGs and go beyond that. Secondly, we were talking about the economic development. Yes, the human development is important, but if we really want to sustain the progress in human development areas, you have to have a sustainable and equitable economic growth. Now, the growth and the poverty, the growth is very limited in all the LDCs and poverty is very high. And we believe that if we have inclusive and equitable economic growth in the LDCs with their own efforts, but supported by the international community, that would really make sure that their own progress and human development will be sustainable in the long run. That's why we focus ourselves on productive capacity building, that is what we call it, which means enhancing our productive sectors in agriculture, industry, or services, depending on the nature of the economy, but also promoting infrastructure, rural infrastructure in particular, and agriculture being the mainstay of many of the LDCs. So there was a commitment on the part of the LDCs themselves, the least developed countries themselves, to do more, to do better, and to have a more pro-development agenda in their own countries. After all, development is our own responsibility. But in a globalized and the integrated world, it is also a responsibility of the international community. So we were looking for support from the international community to develop the productive sector. And finally, on the third issue, which we really discuss, is that today we see the global problems now more recurrent and more widespread than in the past. Whether it is an economic problem, or whether it is a food crisis, whether it is an energy crisis, or whether it is a climate change related effects. Now it is affecting everyone, but the countries like ours, which are more vulnerable, have a least capacity to adapt to the changes or to withstand the negative forces of the changes. That's why we said that A, there has to be global cooperation to deal with these issues, and two, when we talk about that, there has to be strong support for the LDCs to mitigate the risk, but also adapt to the new challenges that we face constantly. So we are happy that there was a very strong commitment. The two things that we are happy about in terms of this outcome is that there was a strong global, the partnership for the development of LDCs, and we also said that we consider this as a mutual responsibility. In today's world, it has to be a global community that we talk about, and we all live in a global village in a real sense of the word. So I think in that perspective, A, it has sensitized the issue of the LDCs at a higher plane. Everybody was talking about it, and we have a few areas, in all these areas, as I said, in the human development area, the productive capacity building areas, as well as the crisis related areas. There was a meeting of minds that A, we have to do more, but two, there has to be a higher level of renewed global partnership to deal with these issues.
Now, you mentioned the MDGs, the
Yeah.
Millennium Development Goals,
Yeah.
and these came out basically out of a conference that the United Nations held in 2000 in New York. There were about 189 countries or
Sure.
so in attendance, and they came up with 8 logical, quantifiable, measurable goals that everybody rallied around, such as reducing abject poverty by 50% by
Right.
2015, to empower women,
Right.
to reduce infant mortality rates.
Yeah.
These are all goals that countries are working on,
Yeah.
nonprofits are working
Yeah.
on, many people are, but you mentioned the one that touches all of our lives, climate change.
Yeah.
And that is part of goal number 7, sustainable development. How important, or what are you doing? I know the LDC group, the least developed countries, are focusing on this, but in Nepal, you have some of the most beautiful mountains in the world. You have some of the greatest snowpacks in the world. How is climate change affecting Mount Everest or some of your other mountains, or the Himalayas in general?
Right. Well, this is a very important topic. In fact, we see that as a major issue for countries like ours for 2 reasons. One, we see that there is already a direct impact, whether it is in the Himalayas of Nepal, or whether it is in the Andes, or it is in the other mountain ranges around the world. You know, we have about 3,000 glacial lakes in the mountains, and in fact, in the Himalayas. And in fact, the Himalayas are not only something very good to look at, but they serve a purpose, which is they are a kind of a water tower for whole of South Asia. And you know, South Asia has about 1.2 billion people, and a large majority of them, they depend for water coming down from the Himalayas. And also on the other side of that, on China, you know, the southern China also depends on the Himalayas. The water from the Himalayas goes, you know, both ways, north, south, east, and west, everywhere. And that's why we see already the melting of glaciers is a major challenge. Now, when the glaciers start melting, there are 2 problems. One is that glaciers are like reservoirs, as I say, the water towers. And when there is a monsoon and there is a water, there is a rain, everything, the snow, it forms snow over there. And then when there is a summer, then it starts, having the water flowing down the river from the, the glacial fed Himalayas. Now that is changing. We see that already happening. Some of the glaciers have either disappeared or disappearing at a very, very fast pace, and that is a worrisome part for us, because the water level which is available for these countries who are living in downstream, it might be reduced over the long period of time. There are already some signs of that. Secondly, there are also directly disaster related challenges. When you have a glacial lake, it is static there, but when it starts bursting, and when the water the melts, then the volume increases and it starts bursting. Downstream effect is sometimes devastating, because we have hydropower, we have people living on the banks and everywhere. Now that is already, we see the frequency of disasters getting bigger and more frequent now than in the past. So we see that this is already a challenge, not only for Nepal, but it is a challenge for the region and a challenge for the international community as a whole, because the climate change gets affected because of the activities, the climate related, the environment related activities that we do around the world, and there is no border, there is no barrier. Anybody who contributes to the carbon emissions, it also ultimately affects the climate change, whether you are in Nepal or in the United States or in Europe, that doesn't make any difference. But the impact of that in countries like ours and other countries as well that we have seen is already devastating. So that's something which is worrisome. That's why this is all the more reason that we all have to work together. Secondly, we have already seen this is the climate change related impact on the rain. For example, countries like Nepal, we depend so much on the natural rain for our agriculture. The irrigation system is there, only about 10-15% of our land is irrigated by the modern irrigation system. Otherwise, we largely depend, we are a mountainous country and irrigation system everywhere is not possible, so it depends largely on the agriculture. Now the monsoon, which is the heavy rain season, we have a rainy season, and which is in fact the season during which we plant our seeds and everything. Now that is also changing. The frequency of the rain that comes and the timing of that rain is now changing. And our people living in the highland and in the valleys, now they don't know when to sow and when to reap. And that's something which is very challenging. And we also see that the water that is coming for the rain as well as from the rivers, now they are affecting many of the lands. So we may not have sufficient water in some areas in some of the land. So we are also thinking about how we can use improved seeds. In fact, we are working with the international community, with the countries in the region as well, because this is a general problem that the countries in the region face. India, China, and Thailand, they also are facing that problem. So we are trying to work with them together with the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, to see that there is an improved variety of seeds which can withstand a little bit of a drought, but also which can grow in the degraded land and other areas. But that is a constant challenge in terms of livelihood. So we see that already happening. And then, of course, there are many other climate-related effects which we yet to fully grasp, but we will know only then when it comes in a big way. So we hope that it does not.
We hope it does not. That's
yeah.
right,
yeah.
because it could be detrimental.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. With the increased population, with greater demands on water,
Right.
with shrinking, the erratic climatic changes taking place around the world, it's often said that there'll be less water available for humans for their use. And a lot of people equate water with the oil of the 21st century. They're saying water may be as valuable as petroleum is today. And of course, this is something that's of great concern to all of us. But the United Nations has been in the forefront in promoting this whole discussion on climate change. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has been a driving force behind this ever since he came into office. The UN has held major conferences. You had the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, which came up with 5 reports, I believe, 5 or 6 major reports, scientific reports on how the climate is changing and how it could be detrimental to a vast number of people around the world. Has the least developed countries, have you adopted any of the recommendations that came out of these other conferences, such as the one that was held in Cancun in 2010 or the one in Copenhagen in 2009? Have you adopted any of those recommendations, or have you come up with other recommendations on how to confront climate change and try to arrest it before we hit that tipping point and go over the edge?
No, I think this is a very important issue for all of us, but more so for countries like ours, as I said, that we have at least capacity to withstand it and also adapt to the new situations. But again, I think the IPCC and the whole climate change negotiations has been a very important forum for us. You may be aware that there is the LDC focused climate change fund, which is created out of this, the climate change negotiations. They are helping us. In fact, in each of our countries, in the 48 countries, we are preparing national adaptation plan in all our countries. For example, my own country has almost finished the preparation of the national adaptation plan, and we are also trying to see in which way we can also contribute to reduce the emission which is coming out of all that, out of all the activities that we do. And besides that, I think it is very important for all of us, as you said very correctly, that water is is a sustenance, and the whole life depends on water. So water is going to be very important, but equally important, as I said, is the livelihood of the people living in who are dependent so much on the land. So the land degradation, how do you really reduce that? This is equally important for us. Energy is in fact another very important issue. We have made a lot of progress in these areas, I would say. We are a mountainous country. So now what we have developed is that we have tried to really enhance the cover of the forest in my own country. There is what we call community forestry project, which has been considered by the United Nations as a successful project in Nepal, which we started way back in the 90s. Now it covers almost 50% of our land, which is owned by the community itself. Government has a regulation, but community owns it. And we find that if you give that back to the community, they know best how to really preserve. But you have to have a technical backup, you have to have a policy level arrangement for all these things. And we see that it is already now protecting our lands, which is a very important thing. And we are, in fact, our experience now, last time when we had the forest meeting here, we were sharing that with many countries of similar nature, how we are doing it and what has been our successful efforts. Secondly, in terms of the energy, we are doing a lot in terms of alternative energy. For example, we are a mountainous country now. We depend, because the government is now taking a number of initiatives with the support of the international community, promoting alternate energy, basically solar energy and the biomass energy. Especially in countries like ours, people depend so much on wood and for firewood, for building everything. But nowadays, what we have really started as a campaign is a biomass and getting energy from biomass, because we are an agricultural country. Every family has at least 1 or 2 cow or buffalo, and so they make use of that biomass, which provides them energy, for the people, which is wonderful. It has 2-3 side effects as well. Most of the time, somehow or other, this is culturally what they do, is that it is the women who have to bear the burden of cooking things at home. Now they don't have to walk long to get a firewood, because they can get it at home if you have a biomass. And it is not that expensive. Well, it is expensive for the people living there, but the global community, it costs about $300 to $400 to make it. And then it can be sustained for a very long time. So the government nowadays, what we do is that we provide some subsidies to the people there. Almost half of that is subsidy by the government. And of course, we are also getting some support from the international community. And then half of them, they can pay back after some period of time. And so this is how we are doing that in terms of really making life easier for them, but 2, we are also taking care of this, the deforestation, the cutting down of trees and all that. So we see a lot of things happening. Similarly with the solar panels, now it is revolutionizing the whole world. The solar panels and solar, the instruments are now coming very, very cheap. That's why I think when we talk about climate change, this technology is very, very important for all of us. We all cannot do research in technology all the time. But if there are technologies which are available, and if you can mass produced after a while, especially when you deal with so much of a big challenge that we all face together, it can completely change the lifestyle. So we have now solar technology. It is not that expensive, because you don't need a grid. And then we have mountain valleys and people living up in the mountains, and with that they can really do a lot of things. For example, the medicines are now refrigerated in the valleys, basically because you have a solar panel which is recharging the refrigerators. So this is what is clearly happening. But what we need is that because it all needs resources, and 2, that needs to be scaled up continuously in order to be really have an outreach program that covers everyone. Because at the end of the day, we all have to make sure that our lifestyle is changed, the way we look at things, the way we do things change, no matter whether it is in Nepal or in Europe or in Africa and Asia. We all contribute to the global climate change, maybe some less, maybe some more, but we should think about how we can contribute to that. And that's why global partnership and global cooperation is really critical. But especially those who emit more emissions must think very about loudly how they can reduce it, and then go towards the alternative the sources of energy. And finally, I should say that desertification is a big challenge. You talk about LDC. We have many countries in Africa, and this growing desertification and the lack of water, you said, especially in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is already a very big challenge. Therefore, we talk about how you can really develop new seeds and new sources of water. How can really you conserve water and then make better use of that is a big challenge for all of us. So we need technology, we need resources, we have to have cooperation of enhanced level, and we should see to it that there is a genuine effort on all our part to make sure that this is a common house, common home for everyone. We all work together for the protection and promotion of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Ambassador Gyan Acharya, you have focused on several important messages, especially the fact that there's some unique, innovative technological activities taking place in the economically developing countries. These problems, climate change, impact people all around the world, but so often it's the people who are the most vulnerable who are impacted the heaviest and the most severely. But these are very important issues, and they're issues we're going to be discussing in the future, but I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to talk about all these issues. Thank you.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on South South News.